In the final minute, Bennett for the pocket, launches to the air, touchdown, A.D. Mitchell.
Chase McGrath for the win for the Volunteers. From 40, on the way, knuckleball. He got it!
How is everybody doing on this fine Monday? I am excited to bring you this recap video. I am Colin Bashnigal, your host, Bash the CFB Show on TikTok. You can find me on TikTok, like I said, Bash the CFB Show. Search me up, Twitter or X, formerly Twitter, Bash_CFB. And then you can also find me at the same tag on Twitch if you want to watch the live streams. Because remember, opinion plus discussion equals community. We're trying to build a community here, big time college football fans is what I am looking for, as we want to see you comment, like, and subscribe to join that community. All right, with that being said, we're going to get straight into it, and I'm going to have a little bit of a different structure. So I'm breaking it down in time slots, and we will talk about the games on the slideshows, and then we will move on and just look at the scores of every single FBS game this week, just real quick. So We're going to try to go fast with each of these games. So let's rock it straight in. All right, here we go. Oregon State and Utah, the 21-7 bludgeoning essentially of Utah looked a lot closer than it actually was. Damian Martinez had a pretty good day. Deshaun Fenwick also. And then, you had just a couple of big plays, and DJ Uiagalelei was pretty efficient, but at the end of the day, just the quarterback position was a massive concern again for Utah with Cam Rising out. No shock here as far as what happened. The Oregon State front seven locked it down. Their secondary is still a point of concern when you play against some of the better teams in the Pac-12. Some other weeknight games that happened, by the way, Western Kentucky was able to beat Mid-Tennessee State 31-10. And then you had Tulsa beating Temple on Thursday night 48-26. And a thriller, Jacksonville State comes back to beat Sam Houston at Sam Houston 35-28 in overtime. Also on Friday night, we had Louisville win a thriller against NC State 13-10, in which they got the late field goal to put them ahead, where Brandon Armstrong could not pull that away. But both offenses kind of struggled. Jawar Jordan and Jamari Thrash could not get loose. Louisiana Tech beat UTEP 24-10. Not really all that close ever in this game. Louisiana Tech controlled it. Smoke Harris getting a late touchdown. BYU 35 and Cincinnati 27 at BYU, where the game started with the scoring with a pick six. And that wraps up the weeknight games. Noon games, USC 48, Colorado 41. It was 34-7 at a point right before the half, and Colorado ended up being able to come back. Now, the clock management down the stretch, I think Deion Sanders is going to look at that and be disappointed with both his management and Sean Lewis's play calling management down the stretch. But they were very competitive in the second half, just ran out of time. Old clock rules, they might have had a shot here. But at the end of the day, USC's defense, very much a concern. Amarian Miller came in, was completely left off the scouting report, and then all of a sudden he went off against a USC secondary. And the other thing I want to say is that defensive line in the first half dominated, and then they were looking good in the beginning of the third quarter. They got tired. They got winded. Conditioning might just be the issue for USC, because that's when they started missing tackles. That's when they started to miss disruption. And at the end of the day, this USC team in game 2 of this long stretch of 9 straight Power 5 games, they had a struggle. They had everything they could handle, and USC is going to be in trouble. As far as Colorado going forward, huge confidence booster. You got a player in Cormani McLean that looks like he's leveling up. You got a freshman in Amarian Miller who's ready to go. We already saw flashes from Dylan Edwards, the freshman, and you got a quarterback that you can trust is a dude in Shedeur Sanders. It was a great game. Colorado just falls short. Noon as well, Florida 14, Kentucky 33. Here's Ray Davis going for 280. He had 4 total touchdowns, 3 rushing, 1 receiving. Absolutely dominated this game. Ray Davis was the MVP of the week for me, for sure. He just dominated and took over this game and made the Big Blue Nation absolutely proud of this football team that is better than last year's team. you could go down the list as well in the receiver room as far as what they got with Barry and Brown, Tavian Robinson, and others. Like there's a lot of receivers that are pretty solid on this team. I really like this Kentucky team. As far as Florida, I kind of told you guys, and there's a reason why they weren't ranked last week. I thought they were fraudulent. I didn't even consider them in my top 25. Now, if they had won this game, it would be different. But Ray Davis ran all over them, kind of like I thought he would. And this receiver core was efficient, kind of like I thought they would be. Kentucky dominates this football game. Texas A&M dominates this one, 34-22, even more than the score indicated. Very good game for the Texas A&M Aggies, as first game without Connor Wegman, who was supposed to be your starter this year. You had good running by Le'Veon Moss on the Texas A&M side, and Max Johnson played pretty decent. He wasn't bad at all in this game. He was able to find Anaya Smith and Evan Stewart a couple of times for some big chunk plays, and that was big for this squad. But Le'Veon Moss had a big day with a $107 on the ground and then added 27 more through the air. Clemson, Syracuse, 31-14, a big bounce back for Clemson with a big statement win against a Syracuse team that a lot of people thought was going to be pretty good, including myself. Now, I do think that this shows Syracuse to be a little bit fraudulent, but it is what it is. The Syracuse team struggled all day long, moving the football and keeping the ball protected. They turned the ball over a little bit too much, and at the end of the day, Clemson just capitalizes off of all the Syracuse mistakes. I believe they turned it over 2 or 3 times. They fumbled the ball 2 times and then had a pick. So 3 times they turned the ball over. This Syracuse team just got absolutely demolished right there in this football game. All right, some other early slate games before we move on. Penn State, their offense struggled to a 41-13 victory, and I know 41 points is a lot, but they were struggling the entire time. It was 13-13 midway through the third quarter. They ended up pulling away from Northwestern. How about Minnesota holding off Louisiana 35-24? Game close for a while. Louisiana was a pretty tough team. Minnesota showing a lot of resolve in the second half. Utah State making the long trip out east to Hartford, Connecticut, in which they got a blocked field goal or a blocked PAT with 40 seconds left that would have tied the game at 34 apiece. Instead, they win 34-33 after that blocked PAT. Tulane kind of survives UAB. UAB up early in this game. They had to rally back. James Madison controlled the game against South Alabama, and South Alabama made it close late. How about Buffalo winning in overtime over Akron? That was a big-time letdown loss by the Akron Zip right there. They thought they had that game in the bag. Central Michigan holds off Eastern Michigan in-state foe 26-23 as we go to the 2 o'clock slate. Boston College holds off Virginia as well, 27-24. Scary injury for Ryan O'Keefe. Looks like a spinal cord injury. Hopefully he is all right, but you fear for the worst right there when it comes to potential paralysis. Miami of Ohio dominates Kent State 23-3. And then finally, California holds off a late Arizona State rally to win 24-21. How about Georgia and Auburn? 27-20 was the final score here between Georgia and Auburn. And this was one that Auburn led the entire way. It was very similar to the South Carolina game, but the difference is Brock Bowers absolutely took over this football game. Brock Bowers just went off. He went crazy. He was the single guy that was able to get the last 2 drives going. And a lot of people are talking about Heisman with him now. This is just one game, but if he can sustain this and be the reason why Georgia is winning games in the SEC, then maybe we can have that conversation. But I'm not having that conversation right now. Michigan, Nebraska, 45-7, dominant. Absolutely got the run game going for sure. And J.J. McCarthy was efficient. Still, a guy nowhere to be found is Donovan Edwards, 3.4 yards per carry in this game. It seemed like Kalel Mullings and Blake Corum were able to have a little bit more success on the ground than Donovan Edwards, but very efficient passing the ball by J.J. McCarthy, 12 for 16. $156, 2 touchdowns. It was a very good game for Michigan, and that defense was suffocating against Henrik Harburg, the backup quarterback. Kansas was in this game for a little while, but at the end of the day, it was just too much. Texas had some late points in this game pulled away from them. I don't want to call them garbage time points because they needed those points to really get comfortable in this game because Kansas was sticking around. But Jason Bean and this offense did not show an ability to throw the ball in this Texas secondary, and Kansas did not cover like I thought they would. I nearly locked it up. I took it off the locks. I'm glad I did that. So I will take it for sure with Kansas not covering in this one, but looking pretty decent still. I don't think this Kansas team is bad. I don't think this Kansas team is any worse than I thought they were. I think they just, this game kind of got away from them as it continued on. They were just outmatched a little bit. I'm going to see what this, we're going to wait to talk about this game for a second so that way I can run through some of these other scores. Maryland beat Indiana 44-17. Purdue dominates Illinois 44-19. Hudson Card looks great out there. Rutgers takes care of Wagner 52-3. But how about this one? Bowling Green upsets Georgia Tech 38-27, just like Georgia Tech to do this. Texas Tech 49, Houston 28 in a high-scoring offensive battle early. Texas Tech's defense bows up in the second half and absolutely shuts down Houston's offense. Baylor wins a thriller, a comeback victory at UCF in the bounce house where you had a fantastic play by Timmy McClain to extend a fourth down tremendously. If you haven't seen it, go look for it. But a 50-yard field goal, 50-plus yard field goal, I think it was like 59 actually, fell well short, and Baylor holds in that football game against UCF. Arkansas State 52, UMass 28. Look at Arkansas State's offense looking really good the last couple of weeks. Beat Southern Miss last week, dominating Massachusetts this week. South Florida beats Navy 44-30, and that was a 19-play parlay. I was 18-1. The one loss was Navy losing. They had the lead, I think, at halftime, and man, that sucked. That stung. Marshall, 41. Old Dominion, 35. Western Michigan, 42. Ball State, 24. Toledo, 35. Northern Illinois, 33 as they survive a late Northern Illinois rally. How about this? Missouri, 38-21 over Vanderbilt with Luther Burden looking great yet again. Boise State could not get it done on the road at Memphis. The score, 35-32. UNLV, 44. Hawaii, 20. Dominant victory for a pretty solid UNLV team that's kind of quiet right now and maybe potentially a dark horse contender in the Mountain West with Wyoming, who beat New Mexico 35-26, a little bit of a disappointing showing against the Lobos of New Mexico. All right, we'll talk about the primetime slate here in a second, but we're going to break down these games in the primetime before we get to the late night games. And this is going to be LSU 49, Ole Miss 55, game of the day, probably. I mean, a lot of people might go back to the Colorado game, and they might talk about that Notre Dame-Duke game, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but this was the game of the day. I mean, bottom line is this. The LSU secondary absolutely struggled. You had Dayton Wade and Jordan Watkins and others have pretty solid days at the end of the day, and they were really, really good in this football game. But this LSU secondary is just putrid. Jaden Daniels, absolute baller. He needs to learn how to slide and not take these massive hits because he's going to get himself hurt. But he's an absolute baller. He kept them in the game. This was a epic duel by Jackson Dart and Jaden Daniels. If you haven't watched it, or even if you had, I suggest you go back and rewatch it or watch it if you missed it. Troy, 28, Georgia State, 7. You know I include G5 in here occasionally, and this was a big-time statement by the G5's Sun Belt representative last year, the high-ranking team or the ranked team at the end of last year, winning 12 games with John Sumrall, having a couple of losses this year, one to James Madison that they really felt like they should have won. But the good thing about it is James Madison is not eligible. They control their own destiny in the Sun Belt to win that conference. And Troy looks like the bona fide favorites, with South Alabama kind of falling off the last couple of weeks, not looking so good, albeit they lost this week to the same James Madison team that Troy lost to. But I digress. This was a big statement against the Georgia State offense that had been high flying in the first 4 weeks. Big time win for the Troy Trojans. Notre Dame, 21. Yeah, 21. Duke, 14. This was one that Notre Dame should have dominated. 100%. They were up 13-0. For a very long time, they were keeping Duke off the board. Riley Leonard, he is a great athlete, and I hope he's all right after it looks like he has a high ankle sprain, but not a great passer. And he's not going to be a great NFL quarterback. I don't know why people think he will be. And also Sam Hartman in this receiver court, like Notre Dame on offense is who I thought they were. Notre Dame's offense is this. Their interior offensive line sucks, which handicaps and limits their run game. And then also, their receivers do not get separation. Sam Hartman, this should have been a game that when Duke was able to get a push up front, this should have been a game that Notre Dame's air attack was able to take over. That's what we heard Sam Hartman and this offense would be able to do all offseason. And this is what Notre Dame fans had you convinced they would do up until the Ohio State game. This is 2 consecutive weeks where the air game could not carry you when they probably needed to. Oh, they had some success running against Ohio State. They had some success running against Duke. The game-winning touchdown was a 30-yard rush by Audric Estime. But what's your point? Okay, they're going to have some success with a running back that is as explosive, first off, as Jeremiah Love, the freshman, but also as great with yards after contact as Audric Estime. You have great tackles and you have a great blocking tight end in Mitchell Evans. Those 3 interior guys are terrible, absolutely horrible. They need to be better. They're not going to be. They have a certain ceiling because of it. And if USC has better conditioning, they're going to be able to beat you. That's a good matchup for USC. If USC runs out of steam, though, at least you got that on your side. But, man, this Notre Dame team, if they're wanting to go 11-1 and be in the conversation for a playoff spot, they need to play better than this. Bottom line. I mean, Duke is a good team. They were getting controlled. Their offense could not do anything for the most part. They missed a couple of field goals. I get that. They had a couple of drives pieced together. But Duke was held scoreless for 2.5 quarters. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it was 2.5 quarters. I watched this game, and, yeah, Notre Dame looked like the much better team, and it took a last-second touchdown to win. A lot of people thought they looked like the much better team against Ohio State. I thought it was an even matchup, but regardless, like, Notre Dame had their opportunities to win that game. These are too close for comfort, and bottom line is this: Marcus Freeman in over his head. This dude tries to say, oh, Audric Estime should have went down at the 1 or whatever. No, when you're losing, you take the lead and trust your defense that is really spanking good. Come on now. Tennessee gets their revenge. No surprise here. Brew McCoy out for what presumably seems like the season. That sucks for him. The run game, though, for Tennessee, absolutely dominant. No shock that South Carolina's offense really couldn't get anything going. This offensive line is putrid. It is what I thought it would be. Air Force dominates San Diego State 49-10. Is that score correct? Oh my gosh, 49-10. Air Force dominates San Diego State. Guys, Air Force is the team you guys need to watch for the New Year's 6 bid. They are really spanking good. The lack of a Power 5 opponent out of conference, that's a big, big deal. And I get why, by the way. They have to play both Navy and Army out of conference. But this Air Force team, if they go undefeated, I want them to get that bid because they're really solid. Alabama 40, Mississippi State 17. Jalen Milroe looked pretty decent as a passer, but they really didn't need that early on. Him as a runner was just really good and exactly what we expected or what I expected. 10 for 12, though, very efficient. $164 for Jalen Milroe passing the ball. Milroe was the leading rusher with 69 yards on 11 carries, 2 touchdowns. McClellan was the feature back with 15 carries and 63 yards and a touchdown, with Roydell Williams also being pretty solid. Justice Haynes, by the way, providing a little bit of a spark. That's a guy to watch for in the future for sure. Some other night game slates as we go back up, or night game scores as we go back. The Oregon Ducks, after having such a slow start against Stanford, ripped it away in Palo Alto, 42-6. Oklahoma, similar thing, slow start on defense, but then they shut down Iowa State, exploded offensively to a 50-20 victory. Rice holds off East Carolina, who tied the game up at 17 apiece, and Rice was able to get that late touchdown to win the game 24-17. North Texas 45-31. They struggled at home against Abilene Christian. Georgia Southern beats a struggling Coastal Carolina. Hey, Tim Beck does not know what he's doing. Sorry, somebody should have warned you. This guy did. Anyway, Texas State beat Southern Miss in a shootout 50-36. This GJ Kinney offense is very exciting. Colorado State beats Utah Tech 41-20. Kind of surprising that they allowed as many points as they did in this one. Iowa beats Michigan State 26-16. Charlotte, tough, but loses on the road at SMU 34-16. Pitt, their disastrous season and maybe a hot seat season for Pat Narduzzi continues on a downward trajectory. 21-38 loss to Virginia Tech and their rival West Virginia, rolling still onto 4-1, 24-21. They beat TCU with some tough, gritty defense. Man, I love to see that for the Mountaineers. App State 41, UL Monroe 40, and what I thought would be a thriller. Great gutsy win by the Appalachian State Mountaineers against a much improved Louisiana Monroe Warhawk team. All right. Night game slate. First off, Nevada and Fresno State. I'll just get this out of the way because there were only 2 late night games. Fresno State 27-9. Not overly impressive, but Nevada has been pretty tough the last couple of weeks, a little bit feisty. This one right here was interesting. Backup quarterback Fafita, I believe is his name, Noah Fafita, in the game for Arizona. He played decent. He wasn't horrible at all. Was able to find Jacob Cowing for a touchdown, was able to get involved with McMillan as well. This offense for Arizona wasn't terrible whatsoever, and they scored 24. We'll talk about that in a little bit. They scored late. They tried to get that ball back. They couldn't do it. They had opportunities in this game. Washington down in the red zone when they were up 31-17, fumbled the ball. Arizona recovered, but they subsequently ended up having to punt. If they score there, this is a nervous game. If you're a Husky fan, instead, this was like holding off a late rally. This Arizona team, pretty solid, but once Washington kind of got up a little bit on Arizona, I think they kind of put they fell asleep almost at the wheel, and it's easy to do that in Tucson or Tempe like I talked about. I still am very impressed with this Washington team. This score is a lot closer than the game really was, and Arizona had more of a shot in this game than they probably should have. Washington dominated this game for the most part, but Arizona was feisty. They fought hard. For as much as you might be able to clown Jed Fish is doing a pretty decent job with this Arizona squad. They're 3-2, probably should have beat Mississippi State. If you avoid the turnovers, you certainly beat Mississippi State, and they could be 4-1. They could have been undefeated going into this game. All right, walk that line. We hit Western Kentucky and Kentucky's covers right there, but UVA, Boston College, they scored just a little too less. It was 27-24 was the final score here between BC and Virginia. And if you calculate that in your head, of course, you will realize that is 51, just shy of this over. If Boston College scores a touchdown instead of a field goal, that over hits at 55 total points. Georgia definitely didn't cover against Auburn. Oregon did cover, even though I was a little bit nervous about it early, but the under did not hit for Indiana and Maryland. So if you combine these two records, 2-2, we're now 3-3, but Rice and Notre Dame came through with 2 late touchdowns to give me covers for Rice and Notre Dame. And through 8 picks, that makes us 5-3. Then we get Charlotte plus 24, smack that. Air Force minus 20 or minus 10.5, easily smacked that. They won by 39. Alabama minus 14, easily covered. They won by 30, 23? Yeah, 23 points. So I guess not as easy, but I wasn't that worried about that cover. Arizona over 24. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. I got it at 24. So I'm counting this as a tie. When kickoff happened, this number was all the way down to 21.5. So I'm going to count this as a push. But if you guys had listened to the show on Friday night or Saturday morning, you would have looked and saw Arizona's team total below 24. And if you would have taken the over, you would have hit. So though it doesn't count as a win to improve the record and it counts as a push, I like that. I really like that. I got Arizona at over 24. It pushed. That's all I can say there. So if we calculate the record through 12, we have a record of 8-3-1 for this week. But this slide was a little bit tough with the team totals. I'm not going to lie. Alabama did hit, but Notre Dame did not. Oregon barely didn't. I thought they were going to. They had 42 for a while, and Georgia didn't even come really all that close. Because like I said, they scored the late touchdown to get to 27 in the first place. So it is what it is. The over-unders for the team totals, that was not great. This was a 1-3 slide, making me 9-6-1 on the week. So if we do the math here, 9-6-1, that's 37 wins. 9-6-1, 37 wins, 39 losses, and 2 pushes. Way closer to 500. I love the improvement. I'm very happy with myself, but this is far from over. We got to have an above 500 week. We had just about a 500 week last week. We had an above 500 week this week. We got to be above 500 the rest of the year. Hopefully we don't have a bad week, and if we do, it's like a game below 500 or at 500. That's going to be the goal. All right, top 5 for the Heisman right now. This is a little bit of a different font, but that's fine. Number 1, Caleb Williams. He has looked like an absolute stud at USC. He should be the favorite to repeat. Now, I want to see what USC does, though. I don't think they're going to win the Pac-12. I don't even know if they're going to be in the Pac-12 championship. So, with that being said, I think Caleb Williams, if they do not win the Pac-12, I don't think he's going to repeat as the Heisman Trophy winner. Michael Penix Jr., I have at number 2. He's been spectacular this year. Ray Davis, I have at number 3. He's been spectacular all year, but he had that big moment on national television against Florida to help bolster it. Number 4, I got Jordan Travis, who has had 2 big moments against Clemson and LSU in which he stood up. Even if he doesn't have the greatest stats, he's still pretty efficient. Number 5, Luther Burden. He's going to be a guy to watch for. They play LSU this week. They got Tennessee and Georgia coming up. Luther Burden has so many spotlight games, just like he kind of had against Kansas State because people should have been watching that game. That was a really good football game. But I know the nature of the brands. Kansas State and Missouri are just not going to draw the eyes that Georgia and Missouri potentially will, or Tennessee or LSU this weekend. So Luther Burden, a guy to watch for. He's number 5. He's my favorite for the Biletnikoff at this moment. I said in the preseason, Keon Coleman. I'm liking Luther Burden first, Keon Coleman second. The interesting thing about it is Luther Burden has had the big games, and Keon Coleman has had the big moments. He had the massive game against LSU where he had that introduction for 3 touchdowns. He had the awesome catch in the end zone to score the game-winning touchdown against Clemson. But Luther Burden, over 100 yards in the last 4 games, and the one that he didn't was South Dakota, where he got taken out early, and he had 96 yards, so just shy of 100. He's probably the best receiver in America right now. Sorry, Marv. Hate to break it to you. All right, top 25. Let's go through it. Number 1, I got Georgia. Number 2, Washington. I still think Washington looks like the most impressive team, even if they struggled against Arizona. You guys didn't really watch that game. If you think they really struggled, that game was not really all that close. That fumble in the red zone really killed them. Otherwise, it would have probably looked like a blowout. Number 3, Michigan. Number 4, we got the Texas Longhorns. And then number 5, we got Ohio State, who was on a bye week, and so was Florida State at number 6. Number 7, Penn State. They struggled on offense. I thought about sliding them down, but Oregon got off to a slow start too. Didn't take advantage of that opportunity at number 8. Number 9, we have Alabama ahead of number 10, USC. A great defense with an offense that's finding their identity at Alabama, and then USC is kind of the opposite. They have a defense who's had their moments, but they are just not sustaining it, and their identity on defense is forcing turnovers, getting aggressive play, trying to get after the quarterback to complement the offense that they have. And that's always been Alex Grinch's style. That's what they were at Washington State when Alex Grinch was there. That's what he was at Ohio State. And then he ended up moving on to Oklahoma and USC with Lincoln Riley, and the same stuff's happening. It's just not working. Number 11, Washington State. Number 12, Notre Dame. Washington State, by the way, a little bit underrated to a lot of people. I still think this Washington State team is real spanking good. They might end up being 8-4, 7-5, but all records aren't equal. That's all I'm going to say, and we'll talk about that a little later. Number 12, Notre Dame. Look, they got to prove some more to me to move back into my top 10. They struggled. And I'm still giving Duke some respect. That defense is really good, but Notre Dame easily should have been able to run away with that game a lot easier than they did. Number 13, Oregon State, big time bounce back win at home against a tough Utah team. Number 14, just quietly sitting there, North Carolina and Drake May. Number 15, Miami, also just quietly sitting there. Tyler Van Dyke has looked very good this year. Number 16, Dylan Gabriel has also looked good for Oklahoma. Number 17, we have the Missouri Tigers. I just talked about Luther Burden. Brady Cook looks really good. They're finding a little bit of run game, and that defense is pretty experienced, even if they're not necessarily the best. Number 18, we have Ole Miss. Big time win against LSU. 19, Kentucky vaults all the way up after dominating Florida at home. 20, Kansas State. Some teams or some people are just sleeping on Kansas State a little bit too much. Just because they lost to Missouri on a 61-yard field goal doesn't mean they're bad. Number 21, Air Force, my current favorite to make the New Year's Six. We'll see if they can hold up that way. We'll see if they can beat Fresno State, beat Wyoming, win the Mountain West. I mean, let's see if they can do that. Number 22, I still have respect for Duke. They're a really good team. Number 23, Fresno State, handling their business on the road or at home, in a little bit of a sleepy game against Nevada. Number 24, we have Tennessee. And number 25, I slotted in Texas A&M. Quietly 4-1 right now. Controlled that game against Arkansas more than the score indicated with their first game. Max Johnson, they have a massive matchup between them and Alabama this upcoming week. Others that I still considered Louisville, but they did not look good, and they're playing Notre Dame. Don't know if that was a look-ahead spot. They're at least off of a little bit of a longer week with having the extra day off, but Louisville's going to be interesting to see. Maryland, right on the outside, they have a chance to make a massive statement against Ohio State this weekend at the Shoe. I'm going to be there. And then we got Kansas right on the outside as well. I still consider them because I still think they're a really good team. Utah, I think they still have a lot of ceiling, and their defense is really, really stingy, really, really good. They're better than I was expecting, but, man, this Utah offense is pathetic, and they still allow some big plays specifically from that back end. Speaking of poor back ends, LSU's is on another level for Jaden Daniels is very fantastic. Logan Diggs is kind of emerging. They got a couple of really good receivers, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, tight end Mason Taylor, and others. But all that talent, that secondary is such a liability. You have 2 losses right now. It's your job to be the burden of proof that you can get this back. And Wisconsin also quietly just sitting there, not really doing much. But they still only just have the 1 loss to what we already established as a really good Washington State team. And by the way, I was on Washington State before most of the public. I just want to say. All right, well, that does it for this video. I'm glad I could condense it a little bit, make it a lot more efficient, make that top 25 segment a lot more efficient, and put it all into one video. I could have made a top 25 video separately, and it would have been very easy to do. But I didn't want to linger on that, especially when we're not on the college football playoff stuff. I wanted to run through it. I wanted to run through the Heisman. I wanted to run through Walk That Line, and I wanted to run through all the games. And that's what we did, and I think we did that pretty efficiently. So thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know if you like what I did today, or if you like what I've done in the past better, or if you think there is something that I should just change up and try that's new. I am open to all discussion, whether it's something about what I'm doing or if it's about one of the college football takes or opinions that I have. But thank you guys very much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Make sure you guys like and subscribe on your way out, and we'll see you guys next time. You have a great rest